So this Will Levis thing, I think where this came from for me, Zach, was conventional wisdom. And I think I've said it, and I think you've said it. I think we've said it. I think other shows have said it. Lots of smart people have talked about this. Like, look, 2024 is about finding out what you have in Will Levis, learning what he is, defining what he is. Is he the guy that can win this team a Super Bowl? Is he not? I think that's the conventional wisdom. Some people have said that's the top priority for this season. I think you're probably a little bit more on the, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you're probably a little bit more on the, yeah, let's do that. But also maybe there's a chance they could win the division and compete. So I think that that's sort of the conventional wisdom of this. And for some reason, I keep thinking like, we're missing something. We're missing something. We're missing something. And I don't know if we're going to learn what we need to learn about Will Levis in 2024. And so it raises a bunch of questions about how to define success. It raises questions about how much runway and leash he has. When I just start that way very broadly before we get into details, do you think that we know definitively by the end of 2024 season, like what Will Levis is, can be, will be? Do you think we have an answer?
Yes. I don't see why you don't. I don't see if let me put it to you this way. If it's muddled, if the answer is muddled or the waters are muddied or it's unclear, then you have your answer. There are lots and lots of quarterbacks in year two that make a definitive jump. Now, what happens after year two, sometimes it's injury, sometimes it's just an implosion of different levels. But at the end of the day, yeah, James Neeson gets it right. If you don't know, you know. If you do not know what Will Levis is and you're still questioning whether he can be the guy or he's the guy worth building around or he's the guy worth giving a second contract to, however you want to define it, if you don't know the answer, you know the answer. I mean, it's pretty. When you look at the stats of second-year quarterbacks, the ones that kind of are in the similar Will Levis situation, similar starts to a rookie year, similar team building, coach changes, system changes, and all this stuff, a lot of them improve their second year. And so if he does not improve from a statistical standpoint and from what you see him do on the field, I think that's your answer. Like, I don't think quarterback wins don't matter to me. Wins do not matter. That the injuries do matter. I mean, there's certain aspects to look at it because at the end of the day, your team is going to know. I mean, your staff's going to know. I do not understand this logic that, they may not have an answer. Like I said, if there's not clarity, then you have your answer. He has to separate himself.
Could there be clarity? Could they have the answer internally and us still not be asking the right question, which is he good enough to win a Super Bowl? So I think answering a question
Did you ever think Jared Goff was good enough to get to a Super Bowl? Did you ever think that Matt Stafford was good enough to really win a Super Bowl? So, I mean, Stafford maybe, but at the end of the day...
No and yes.
Listen, Joe Burrow's good enough to win a Super Bowl doesn't mean that he will. Dan Marino's good enough to win a Super Bowl doesn't mean he will.
Of course.
And listen, I'm not saying that Will Levis is any of those guys, but Will Levis can be Matt Stafford. He could be Jared Goff. He can be, your guys in the 60% can win you Super Bowls. Not really win, you have to build around them, but they are guys that you can invest a second contract in and reap rewards and reap benefits and stuff like that. It's at the end of the day, it's all about, is Will Levis good enough that you foresee over the next year? Because after this year, you have one more year before extension time.
Yep.
Right.
That's the issue.
Whether he's good or bad. So you should know after this year because he is a second round pick. So you have to know.
So I think one of the reasons this keeps coming up is that the window is fairly small and the team still feels far away. Although they've done a great job in the offseason of plugging holes. And what I find interesting, you bring up Goff and Stafford. Those are like two of the names that I really actually focused on when I was getting ready for this. And I'll throw a couple of other names out there. There's also a Titans element to all of this, which I think we need to acknowledge shades our judgment sometimes on how to evaluate quarterbacks so we'll get to that in a second. It's funny you mentioned Goff because Goff I thought was I think Jared Goff is one of the most interesting quarterbacks on the planet, just like in general. He gets kind of thrown into the starting lineup. He's obviously different than Will Levis in terms of where he's drafted, but that kind of goes out the window once you're on the field. He goes 0 for 7, more interceptions than touchdowns. Really not that great. He in 2017 and 18, they go 24-7. He has 60 touchdowns. They throw for 8,500 yards, 19 interceptions, and they end up in a Super Bowl. So he's won games. And the 4 ways I would define sort of successful quarterback plays: production, and for Will Levis in particular on year 2, there's statistical production and efficiency. There's leadership and sort of culture and locker room and maturity and just being an adult professional athlete. There's physical development, like, hey, my arm slot got a little more accurate, or my footwork, or I learned reads better, or whatever. And then there's sort of winning at the end of it. If you do all the first 3 things, you sort of end up with a winning player or a winning team. And Goff checked every single box basically in his second and third seasons. And then he was traded with 3 draft picks because he wasn't good enough for them. Now it turns out now he's having this renaissance with Detroit, which makes him utterly fascinating. How about Carson Wentz, MVP candidate, incredible statistical production, was leading the team. They're winning games. They go 11-2. He gets hurt. We know what happens in the playoffs. They eventually win the Super Bowl. And he's like garbage after that. Joe Burrow, you mentioned him. This is a guy who 2 seasons have been lost to injury. The other 2 seasons are completely elite. So we kind of know what he is, but the injuries are a factor. And I'll go back to Mariota just because this is a Titans fan base here. Like before Ryan Tannehill came along and sort of one-upped him in every category, Mariota's 25, 16, and 17, his first 3 years, it's hard to define anything other than that being a successful turnaround from the worst team, one of the worst teams in the NFL, largest franchise win increase, one of the best statistical seasons by a Titans quarterback. And I'm not counting Warren Moon here. I'm talking just Titans, right? Steve McNair is basically the only guy that's better than Marcus Mariota from a numbers perspective up until that point. There was one really good Matt Hasselbeck year. We all know the Vince Young season. There was a Kerry Collins season in there. But like from a 3 or 4 year window, nobody had done really what Marcus had done. And he gets hurt, and Tannehill comes in and steps in. And Tannehill's actually a really fascinating study through all of this as well. Tannehill, double-digit interceptions, never had a winning record for like 9 years. Then he gets traded here. It works. The change of scenery works, and all of a sudden he's doing what Tannehill done, which is, I think he's clearly the second best quarterback in Titans history behind Steve McNair. So ultimately, all of this, it leads me to think that we could see a lot of good stuff from Will Levis. We could see production. We could see leadership. We could see development, and they might win more than 6 games. But I don't know if that's going to definitively tell. Like, do you think that is not muddled at all, or do you think that's clear that it's giving you the answer?
I think what he does gives you the answer. I looked at 6 quarterbacks: Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence, Ryan Tannehill, Marcus Mariota, Jared Goff, and Derek Carr. Like, to me, those 6 guys are all guys that have similar situations, similar questions coming in to their rookie year, coming out of their rookie year. I think the only one that had a bit of success their rookie year, really, Carr and Trevor Lawrence, but we know that Trevor Lawrence had Urban Meyer and double-digit interceptions and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
So I took their stats, and I went from year 1 to year 2. And I did completion percentage, touchdowns, interceptions, average yards per attempt, yards per game, passer rating, EPA, and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I want to take these averages of these 6 quarterbacks and what they did from year 1 to year 2, because everybody got better in year 2. Everybody got better. And I was like, okay, so what could you, if you took the average growth, what kind of stat line should you expect from Will Levis in a 17-game season? Because you got to play your full 17 games. That's why I did yards per game. And if you're looking at it, he should go from 58.4 completion percentage to 62.6 completion percentage. He should go from 1,800 yards over a 9-game span to should be over 4,000. So like baseline should be 4,000 over a healthy 17 games, because he should be you should expect a jump with this new offense, with better pass catchers, with a better offensive line coach and a better offensive line. Obviously, this means you have to get the franchise left tackle, but
right.
Your yards per game should go from 200.9 to 243. You should see a 20.9% increase.
It's crazy that 243 is what gets you to 4,000 these days.
Yeah, right.
Just by the way, as a side note.
And so, you should see probably, anywhere from 27 to 30 something touchdowns. You should see maybe 7 interceptions versus 4 because you're going to be playing more games and throwing the ball more. And you should see your passer rating jump up. Like, all this stuff is tangible evidence, but all this stuff you just can't luck into. You just don't luck into being a 4,000 yard passer unless you're throwing the ball 600 or 700 times, like whatever Jameis Winston did to get his, 4,000 yards. But for the most part, you don't luck in. You can't just luck into it at any point and do that. And when you got Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, whatever happens at wide receiver, tight end, and left tackle, you got a better center. I think we very much underplay what Lloyd Cushenberry is going to mean for not only just the offensive line in general, but for Will Levis. And you got a better staff on paper, a better staff. This quarterback, Will Levis, is not the handpicked golden child of Brian Callahan. Now, the questions surround whether it's, between Ren Carthon that doesn't really matter. Because at the end of the day, if Will Levis does not perform and not take a leap visually on the field every week to week and in the stat box, Brian Callahan's going to go to Miss Amy. He's going to go to Ren Carthon. They're going to have a little powwow and say, look, this guy declined. He didn't get any better. He's, let's just say that, he's just busy partying, going to the Masters or something like that. He's just not as dedicated as we all thought he would be, or he's put in the work. It's just not good enough. Like, the work's not translating. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you put in the work and it does not translate. This is all stuff you can tangibly see. There is no muddling. What muddies the waters for Will Levis is 3 people on the offensive line get injured and they're out for the season, and then DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley are both out for the season.
Okay, so I agree with you on the injury stat. That sort of like leaves everything it puts it into gray area. And Zach says, it would be hard for, not you, Zach, but our listener, Zach said, it would be hard for Levis to take a leap visually. Dude is already stunning. Yes, heavy QB1 vibes down there at Augusta National. I think, to your point, you kind of laid out numbers that I would consider like a heck of a season. Now, number one, again, Carson Wentz in only like
heck of a season by Titans standards, but by the NFL standards, is kind of
He had Carson Wentz had 4,000 yards passing in like 11 or in 13 games, and it's fair to say that it wasn't it. That wasn't the thing. And so so let's say it's like 3,600 yards.
But his thing it wasn't because of year 2, right? Like, you're talking about when they exited Carson Wentz at year 2, they thought they had their guy.
Oh, exactly. This is my point.
That's not how you're phrasing the question. Can you know after year 2? Yes. But can other things happen after year 2? Obviously. Injuries can happen and all this other stuff. That's for anybody.
Okay,
so
hang on. Hang on.
Injuries in year 3.
I'm not talking about, that's fair, but let's take injuries away. Like, ultimately doing the research on this, what I feel like I've learned, because this is kind of, I couldn't really figure out, and you and I were talking over the weekend, like, I can't really figure out what it is that's causing me to think about this Levis thing and his second year and what it's going to look like now that they've invested in the receivers and they're probably going to invest in the offensive line. Cushenberry, I agree with you, is a huge factor. Look at the 2 running backs they got back there now. Everybody likes those as a tandem. Like, my issue, the thing about Wentz is sort of the example. Like, they thought they knew, they were wrong. Like, and it wasn't just an injury.
They weren't wrong. It was injuries. That's what derailed his whole season. It was not only he also suffered an injury in 2017. He suffered an injury in 2018, and he never recovered. Marcus Mariota never recovered from breaking his leg on Christmas Eve.
And the nerve injury. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff out of your control. It's not. I think at the end of the day, you want. I view quarterback play, and I think the NFL told us this. You saw Justin Fields, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell all find new homes. Okay. It's a year by year league at the quarterback position. So can you know that, okay, in 2025, 2024 is going to tell me that at least 2025 I got my quarterback? Or is 2024 going to tell you I better go ahead and start looking at quarterbacks? That's what it's going to tell you.
So
You're
I agree.
wanting a long-term solution. I don't think there is long-term solutions.
Maybe you're right.
Listen, what if CJ Stroud and company, they go take a step backwards, right? In year 2.
But it doesn't.
Then
I
you're
think,
kind of like, ooh.
but I think this is what I'm trying to maybe get across and maybe in my head work through is that it's not linear. You don't just go from like being D level to C level to B level to A level. Sometimes in NFL careers, this fucking wild roller coaster of ups and downs. And we may think we know something about this year that gives us really good information about next year. But if we're talking about what I exactly believe this is about, which is the second contract, we're not far away from them having to make a very large decision. And maybe the dollar figure is the thing that's we're actually negotiating here, right? Like maybe they learn that he's clearly good enough to be given a second contract, but over the next, let's say 2 years of football, that's when we're going to find out if he's a $40 million a year guy or a $27 million a year guy. And I'm just pulling those numbers out relative to today. But like, if you look at these careers, like they're other than like the ones that are so obvious, Joe Burrow going to a Super Bowl in year 2, Patrick Mahomes doing what he's done. Like I have these debates and discussions, and this is partly why I'm having this problem. Like Jordan Love is still like, I think the diehard Packer fan is just like all in on Jordan Love. They love Jordan Love.
They should be, because he's going to keep on growing, because he's got a good situation, good young receivers. There's just nothing. There's nothing there that says, there's nothing you saw on tape last year that says, man, Jordan Love cannot win in this league. He cannot get us to a Super Bowl. Yeah, I think if you saw that, then you were watching a totally different Jordan Love than I was. I think I saw Jordan Love, and I saw a guy that's going to continue to grow. Now that he's got a full season behind him, he will continue to grow.
I think that's conventional wisdom, and in most situations, if you're good enough, that's absolutely true, and that's absolutely what's going to happen. But if you're
going to be pessimistic, then yes, I would agree with you. But I think there's a degree of realism that all teams think they have the guy. They're not going to know they don't have the guy until they know they don't have the guy, right? Like the Giants, I would agree with Chef Rand. That was a weird situation. They went ahead and paid him after one good season, totally erasing the previous seasons. And then what did he do? He went back to be a pumpkin. Jordan Love, right? He's still on a pretty inexpensive contract, right? So if he continues or keeps progressing this year, then you got the guy.
But I don't you got a guy. But honestly, having watched it, this is why I don't think it's linear. I think with Jordan Love, I can absolutely, without being pessimistic, just realistically say he missed a lot of really wide open throws. He made some rookie decisions, which is, again, part of the learning process. He's not very good outside of the confines of the offense, and maybe you don't have to be. I don't know. But I think based on statistical production and winning and all the other ways you kind of grade out the quarterback, leadership, etc., it's hard for him to get a lot better next year. Like one of the greatest first seasons in the history of statistical production from an NFL player. It's going to be very hard. And I think to take it back to Levis and Stroud. I think this is a good comparison. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Will Levis takes a major step forward and CJ Stroud takes a step back, and that doesn't actually dictate where their careers are going. And like, does that make sense? Like I could see Will Levis, like, what is that? So Dak Prescott is a fascinating one to me. Pretty good right away. Like when he got onto the field with the Cowboys, he's been a pretty good quarterback most of his career. But like there's all these questions and debates about, can he win this big game in the big moment? And like, is he worth the contract? Is he worth the money? And like they've been to the playoffs like 5 times. Like they're pretty good with him. He's a pretty good player, but we still have these conversations. What is Tua? Some of that is based exclusively on injury, but what is Tua? Jalen Hurts gets all kinds of questions about what he is and who he is. And so I think it's good. It's one thing for Brian Callahan to know exactly what Will Levis is in his head. He'll never say that publicly. Like, oh, I think I would love Brian Callahan with some truth serum. And Zach, you're like, look, Is he a 20, a 60, or a 20 guy? And Brian Callahan's like, well, he's quarterback number 13. Like I would love to know exactly where he thinks.
We all know I'm not banking. Here's the thing. You don't have to be 20 to get the second contract. You don't have to be in that top 20%.
Agree.
You don't have to be the top 20% for a team to believe in you. So I think I think right now you would say that realistically, right now, until we have more information, he's at the bottom of the 60%. You saw some good stuff. You know he's got the intangibles down. You know he's got the leadership. He's got the personality, the drive, the fight. But it all comes down to how can he take that next step statistically, in a lack of a better term. How does he increase his accuracy? Because if he doesn't increase his accuracy, you're not going to see. You're going to know your answer. Like that's just how I am. I think you're going to know your answer. You're going to know. I'll say this. I think this is the best way to put it. You're going to know that he's definitely not the guy, or you're going to know, okay, I think he's on the right path. That's how I kind of view it.
I think this is how I settled on it as well. A really big step forward in progress is awesome and great and enjoyable, but that does not mean we know the final answer on him. And ultimately, I think you're right. Outside of a 3-win season where it is just clear he can't read defenses and he actually goes from 58 to 56% completion percentage. And again, I'm not saying I think this is going to happen, but outside of the two extremes, right, where it's clear that it's not clicking, right? You're Kenny Pickett or whatever. You're just like a big transformer version of Kenny Pickett. Or Joe Burrow, year 2, just clearly understands everything, executes accuracy, and it leads to success, both statistically and on the field. I think those are extremely rare, and I don't think you see them very often, and I don't think you're going to get that this year. And ultimately, what I think, so maybe you're right. Maybe it's like, if the answer is no, clearly no, we're all going to know. And I think that's probably fair. But if the answer is maybe, which I think there's a better chance that at the end of 17 games, the answer is still going to be like, yeah, maybe, probably. I think he's got a lot of potential.
You may have to take year 3 to figure out, is Will Levis going to revert back to what he was in 2023? He shouldn't, right? Because he's going to have more time. He's going to have better weapons. You should be expecting a considerable leap in production-wise and what he's able to do, what he's able to read. The plays are going to be better. You should expect the leap. If you do not get a leap, a tangible leap, you know your answer. I don't care about the wins. He can be a 4,000-yard passer, or let's say 36. He can be a 3,800-yard passer, and it not amount to a double-digit win season. It could amount to still a losing record season, because at the end of the day, there's defenses got to play.
Yeah.
And you just so much going on.
Right.
So, to me, it's like, if I see a considerable jump, does that mean 100% sure the Titans are winning a Super Bowl with Will Levis? No. Does that mean that year 3 is you feel comfortable passing on a quarterback in the draft because you got enough out of Will Levis that you know that because they're going to know more than we are going to know.
Exactly.
We're going to be living in the land of projection and speculation. Yep. They're going to know behind the scenes. Okay, we saw what he did behind the scenes. We saw how we surrounded him with talent. We saw that he put in the work, and it all yielded results from his standpoint. So we know that in the next year, we're going to have more continuity, right? The Colts will still be here. I'll still be here, but this is Brian Callahan speaking. And then we're going to have even more money to spend. We're going to have another draft. We're good to go. We're still going to be speculating, but they're going to be making moves that they think that Will Levis is the guy. And I think that ultimately is how you got to kind of view it. We're speculating, hypothesizing, poking holes in the game. And that doesn't mean that he can't regress in year 3.
Right.
That's entirely possible.
Which also has no direct correlation to what he does in year 4, 5, and 6. Like they're just, it does, because they're not going to, if he regresses in year 3, they're done with it.